Welcome to my presentation. My name is Mariana, as I think you've gotten to know over the course of the day, and I will be presenting our case series on auditory disturbances in childhood vasovagal syncope conducted at the BHR Trust in collaboration with Queen Mary University of London. So just a quick, no conflict of interest here. Right, on to the introduction then. So I think, as we all know, vasovagal syncope is a common cause of transient loss of consciousness in children and adolescents. It is generally considered benign, but because it presents with alarming symptoms and sudden collapse, it can be very distressing for both the patient and the families. The prodromal phase is well described in the literature. So you have symptoms like dizziness, pallor, diaphoresis, nausea, and visual changes such as blurred vision and tunnel vision, and they are all well-recognized symptoms. However, auditory disturbances have been less well characterized. While there is a general consensus in the medical field that this is a fairly common symptom for the child to experience, there is little systematic description in the pediatric population, which raises an important question. How common are they? What types occur? And what do they tell us about the underlying physiology of vasovagal syncope? It was therefore our objective to try and characterize auditory disturbances reported in childhood vasovagal syncope. In terms of our method, we did a retrospective observational hospital-based studies where essentially we analysed the data obtained from children and adolescents with vasovagal symptoms that were referred to our clinic between 2017 and 2024. The detailed histories were obtained from the patients, and the information about the auditory disturbances during the attacks of vasovagal syncope was directly obtained from both patients and any witnesses of the attack at the time. For each child, we documented whether the disturbances were unilateral, bilateral, their specific nature, and the timing relative to the loss of consciousness. So we included a total of 112 patients. All of the patients had experienced vasovagal syncope, and the ages ranged from 5.5 years to nearly 17 years old. Out of these 112 patients, we found that 18 patients reported auditory disturbances. And these disturbances were normally experienced alongside 3 to 5 other non-auditory symptoms and signs during the prodromal phase of vasovagal syncope. 4 different types of auditory disturbances were noted: muffled hearing, tinnitus, hearing loss, and hyperacusis. The most common was muffled hearing, with 11 of our patients experiencing that, while tinnitus and hearing loss was the second most common, with 6 patients each, and only 1 patient noted hyperacusis. Most of the symptoms were bilateral, except for 1 case where the patient suffered just a right-sided tinnitus. And similarly, all the patients experienced these symptoms during the prodromal phase, except for 1 patient with tinnitus who also experienced muffled hearing in the post-ictal period. So this is all well and good. We've said this is a fairly common symptom. We've mentioned the types that have occurred, but why does it happen? And this is where we want to go forward. So we started off by doing a literature review of the current literature with regards to the possible causes of the auditory disturbance in vasovagal syncope. And unfortunately, there's actually not a lot out there which really describes the reasons as to why. So we kind of had to make a few assumptions, which we are going to be using as hypotheses moving forwards to see whether this is the actual cause or not. And these are the 4 main hypotheses that we've kind of come up with. They all kind of link together as well. So these several mechanisms may explain the auditory disturbances observed in childhood vasovagal syncope. First, we have the cerebral hypoperfusion. As we all know, during this vasovagal syncope, there is reduced cerebral blood flow, and this can transiently impair the neuronal activity in the auditory cortex and the brainstem pathways. These areas are highly metabolically active and sensitive to even brief ischemia. Alternatively, we could look at the peripheral and consider the cochlear ischemia itself, and the inner ear vulnerability may also play a role. The stria vascularis is particularly oxygen dependent, and transient hyperperfusion or hypoxia may result in hair cell transduction which alters the endolymph homeostasis and even triggers spontaneous depolarization, which is can be perceived clinically as tinnitus or muffled hearing. In fact, we actually believe that possibly both of these mechanisms can act together and exacerbate each other, causing the emergence of the auditory symptoms during the syncope. Another possible option could be neurotransmitter imbalance, which could have been implicated. So disruption of glutamate and GABA balance during syncope can alter excitability with auditory pathways, potentially leading to increased neural synchrony and the perception of phantom sounds. And finally, in terms of the autonomic dysregulation, this may contribute, especially in cases of hyperacusis. So increased central auditory gain, potentially mediated by noradrenergic arousal from the local coeruleus and limbic system, can heighten auditory perception and sound sensitivity in the prodromal phase. There may also be a role for a neuroanatomical overlap between auditory and autonomic centers, with the insular and anterior cingulate cortex are involved both in the autonomic regulation and the auditory perception, and likewise in the brainstem, the nucleus tractus solitarius and the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus lie in close proximity to each other. Proximity to the auditory and vestibular nuclei, suggesting that the autonomic reflexes may actually directly influence the auditory processes during syncope. Taken together, these mechanisms highlight the auditory disturbance of syncope likely result from a complex interplay of central and peripheral processes rather than a single pathway. But the fact is, we don't actually know currently what the true cause is, and we hope to find that out in further research. So obviously, as with any research, there are limitations. The main one being that the study is still relatively quite small, and that limits the generalizability of the findings. Another limitation that I haven't actually included in the slide, erroneously, is it is also important to note that the symptoms are self-reported, either by the patient or by the patient's family, which does introduce some recall bias and some subjective variability. And finally, there is still limited knowledge on the mechanism linking vasovagal syncope with auditory disturbances, so which kind of limits how we can proceed forwards with these symptoms. So in conclusion, auditory disturbances are not uncommon in the prodromal phase of childhood vasovagal syncope. They may take the form of muffled hearing, tinnitus, hearing loss, or hyperacusis, and recognition of these symptoms can be clinically useful. They may improve diagnostic accuracy when evaluating transient loss of consciousness in children. They can also provide reassurances to family that these unusual and sometimes frightening symptoms are part of just the benign syncopal process, rather than an indication of a primary ear disease or a neurological disorder. However, further work is required to explore the pathophysiological mechanisms and to establish whether these auditory symptoms could serve as a reliable prodromal warning sign. Thank you very much. And please, any questions?